said since I was a little boy, all I wanted to do was be a farmer, and I made it. So, advice for future farmers, I don't know. I was thinking about this earlier, and I started over 50 years ago, and I remember other farmers saying, well, it's really hard to start farming now. So that hasn't changed. That, you know, it takes just a lot more capital now, that, you know, and I think it'd be harder for a young person to start out completely on their own. I mean, I would suggest if somebody young wanted to get into farming, maybe try to find a farm that's operating where a guy is older and doesn't have any family members coming up. I think that's probably about the best way to get into farming nowadays. But you know, the amount of capital, it's hard. You know, you're not going to go out and, you know, no bank is going to borrow millions of dollars to some young guy that says, well, I think I want to milk cows. You know, well, that's not going to work. So I think that would be the best way to get in. But if you want to do it, you can do it, because like I said, when I started 50 years ago, I said, well, it's really hard to do it now. Well, that's the same. The history of our farm starts in 1958. I was in second grade at that time. My parents moved here from Appleton, right outside of Appleton. We were renting a farm. So I've been here all that while, except for when I was in service in Vietnam, and then I came back and actually took over ownership of the farm in '72. And I got married in '76 to my wife Jean. So we dairied together for quite some time in a stall barn, and then we had 4 kids, and we all had them help us come along. And so then when I was about 40 years old, I started thinking, well, if I want to do this for another 20 years, I can't keep getting up and down milking these cows. So and if I wanted to keep at least one of my kids interested in the farm, I had to go to something more modern. So we started building these barns, sections at a time, and we put a parlor in our old barn, a flat parlor in our old barn, and we just gradually kept growing. And then when Jim graduated from high school, he wanted to stay on the farm. So then in a few years later, Dan, our youngest son, graduated too. So they were both going to stay. So then we really got more serious about more expanding and thinking more about building an actual parlor and stuff. So things just kind of kept growing, and if you look at the pictures, you can kind of see how all that went. So at Birling's Bovines, right now we have 1,370 cows, counting dry cows. We farm over 3,000 acres. The 4 kids actually own the farm. It's my son Jim and my son Dan and my daughter Tammy and my daughter Cindy, and they each have different responsibilities. Jim does everything with the feed, the cropping. He's in charge of those things. Him and Dan work together on all the harvesting and all the actual field work. Tammy and myself work with the cows. She does all the computer stuff and herd checks and all that. I'm in charge more of health, make decisions on health and taking care of the parlor as far as when we milk our treated cows and stop and milk our treated cows and wash and start back over again. But and Cindy does the calves and financials. So, well, I think our farm is unique because, well, for one thing, my wife and I raised 4 kids, and all 4 kids are still involved with the farm, which I know, like I said, I have a lot of history, and over the years I've seen family farms where 2 or 3 of the family were in on the farm, and gradually one left, another one left, and pretty soon it was down to 1. So far, I haven't heard anything that anybody really wants to leave. I know Jim and Dan are really committed for sure, because Jim has 2 young boys. He's hoping that the farm will continue to, that generation can maybe come in, and Dan always talks about hoping somebody in the next generation can come along and take over. So I think that's so the uniqueness of it is that we have that many family members here, and the other thing is that we're always, different people say, well, there's always a Birling around here, My favorite part, I don't know, I just like everything. I like everything. I mean, I've had different jobs, and they said, well, why don't you have somebody else do that? I said, well, I kind of like to do that, and so I've kept a lot of jobs that I don't have to do. I put in 10, 12 hours every day, so like I said, I like taking care of animals and being successful at it. When you have an animal that's you see something wrong with it, and you can do something for a couple of days, and she makes a recovery. You know, it's a good feeling. I like to see crops grow, and so like I said, I like I like all that stuff. So I'm like that. Future goals for our farm, and I've met most of the goals that I had. I said I was hoping at least one of the kids would stay, and 4 of the kids stayed. I wanted to modernize the farm, and we've gotten that done. So my goal right now is probably to make, just hopefully that the farm keeps going as being run by Birlings,